They burned the jacket of a quiet geologist, believing they were asserting dominance. They were wrong. They had only stripped away the camouflage from the weapon beneath, and by the time the mountain itself became her network and the very ground her trigger, they would learn that some legends are quiet for a reason. The silence in the Tartarus Range was not an absence of sound, but a presence. It was a physical weight composed of immense pressure and geologic time, a silence that had existed long before the outpost was carved into its heart and would remain long after the metal was gone. Forward operating base. Acheron was a scar of titanium and composite, wedged into a granite massif that groaned under its own impossible mass. Inside, the air tasted of recycled oxygen, ozone from stressed electronics, and the fine, pervasive dust of powdered rock that no filtration system could ever truly defeat. For Dr. Aris Thorne, this environment was a language. She felt the subtle shifts in barometric pressure against her skin, registered the low-frequency hum of the base's geothermal generator, not as noise, but as a baseline rhythm, a telltale heartbeat against which all other vibrations could be measured. She sat at a secondary console in the corner of the command center, a space allocated to her as an afterthought. The main holotable dominated the room, a shimmering blue nexus of tactical data that was currently cycling through useless satellite imagery. The sky above was a perpetual storm of electronic countermeasures, rendering orbital views into abstract art. Aris ignored it. Her own screen displayed something far more fundamental, a cross-section of the lithosphere beneath them, rendered in a complex tapestry of color-coded density and stress vectors. Lines of cobalt blue indicated stable gneiss, while spider webs of angry crimson showed seismic shear zones. Acheron was built directly over a nexus of these crimson lines, a fact the original survey team had noted as a geological curiosity, not a tactical vulnerability. Aris knew it was both. Her fingers moved with quiet economy across the interface, adjusting the gain on a series of deep earth acoustic sensors she had calibrated herself. The standard issue geophones were designed to detect heavy vehicle movement. She had repurposed them, slaved them to a custom algorithm, and turned them into a listening device for the mountain's whispers. The data streams were faint, patterns hidden within gigabytes of noise, but to her they were as clear as spoken words. The mountain was tense. The resonant frequencies were subtly sharpening, a sign of increasing strain deep within the crust. Something was pushing it. Her appearance was a study in deliberate unobtrusiveness. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, practical knot. Her face was lean, her features defined by an economy that suggested nothing was wasted, not even expression. She was a civilian attachment, a geologist sent to monitor the region's notorious instability, and she looked the part. Her clothes were functional, gray fatigues and worn boots. Over it all, she wore a simple, faded olive field jacket. It was a civilian piece of gear, its pockets bulging not with ammunition, but with sample bags, a folding rock hammer, and a worn data pad. The fabric was stained with mineral deposits, the rusty red of hematite from the upper ridges, the chalky white of calcite from the lower caves, the dark gray of powdered basalt. It was a map of her work, a testament to her purpose here. It was also a source of profound irritation to the base commander. Major Kalen Vance entered the command center as if breaching a door. He moved with a forced, aggressive energy that seemed to suck the thin air from the room. His uniform was impossibly crisp, his boots polished to a black mirror, his jaw set in a permanent state of belligerent command. He was a man forged in the rigid traditions of the line infantry, a believer in spitshines, shouted orders, and the absolute authority of rank. A place like Acheron, a high-tech listening post on the edge of nothing, made him feel obsolete, and his insecurity manifested as tyrannical adherence to protocol. He strode to the hollow table, his boots clicking sharply on the metal deck plates. He glared at the swirling static that represented their orbital blindness. "Report!" he barked, the word a physical blow to the room's tense quiet. The comms officer, a young lieutenant with permanently frayed nerves, flinched. "No change, sir. Hostile ECM is total. We're still deaf and blind up there. Long-range comms are down to intermittent burst sends." "And the perimeter?" Vance's gaze swept the room, not to gather information, but to find fault. His eyes landed on Eris. They narrowed. The sight of her, a civilian anomaly in his perfectly ordered military world, was a persistent grit in the machinery of his command. Her quiet focus, her disregard for the theater of military posture, felt like a personal affront. He saw her worn, stained jacket as a symbol of chaos, a stain on his authority. "Perimeter is green, sir," the tactical officer answered, but Vance was no longer listening. He changed trajectory, his path now aimed directly at Eris's quiet corner. The officers at the main table tensed, recognizing the familiar pattern of a storm gathering. Eris did not look up. She continued to trace a newly forming stress line on her display, a faint thread of incandescent red creeping toward the base's foundations. The micro-tremors were becoming more coherent, less like random noise and more like a structured signal. It was a rhythm, purposeful. Vance stopped directly behind her, his shadow falling over her console. The air grew thick with his disapproval. "Dr. Thorne," he said, his voice a low growl of contempt. The title was an insult in his mouth. "Are you contributing to the defense of this installation, or are you merely cataloging pebbles?" She finished her annotation on the screen before turning her head slightly. Her eyes, a cool, analytical gray, met his for a fraction of a second before returning to the data. "I am monitoring seismic instability, Major. The substrata is under unusual strain." "Unusual strain," Vance echoed, his lips twisting into a sneer. He gestured dismissively at her screen. "The whole damn mountain range is under strain. It's a pile of crumbling rock. What I need are enemy positions, troop movements, tangible threats, not geology lessons." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that carried across the entire command center. "And I have a question about your uniform, Doctor, or rather, your lack thereof. This is a military installation under high alert. There are standards. That thing you're wearing is a disgrace. It's filthy. It's a violation of basic hygiene protocols." The accusation was so absurd, it was brilliant in its pettiness. Eris's jacket was not dirty. It was marked by the earth she studied. The stains were data, each one a record of a specific geological stratum. To Vance, it was just dirt. He was incapable of seeing the information it represented. She finally turned fully in her chair to face him. Her expression was placid, a calm sea over an unfathomable depth. "It is a field jacket, Major. It is designed for work in the field. The mineral deposits are inert." Her placid, factual response was gasoline on the fire of his insecurity. He saw it not as an explanation, but as defiance. He wanted fear, or at least deference. He received only data. This quiet, unassuming woman refused to participate in his drama, and that made him furious. "I don't care what it is," he snapped, his voice rising. "I care what it represents. A breakdown in discipline. A civilian disregard for the order that keeps us all alive. I will not have it in my command center. He straightened up, puffing out his chest. This was the climax of his performance. He was reasserting his dominance in the only way he knew how, through the arbitrary exercise of power. "Sergeant!" he bellowed, pointing a rigid finger at Aris. "Confiscate that garment. Take it to the incinerator. We will maintain standards here, even if our civilian attachments will not." A heavy silence fell over the room. The order was petty, vindictive, and deeply personal. It was an act of humiliation, not military necessity. The sergeant he had addressed, a burly man from base security, looked deeply uncomfortable. He glanced from Vance's furious face to Aris's unnervingly calm one. Aris's gaze did not waver. She processed the command, analyzed its intent, and calculated the probable outcomes of compliance versus resistance. Resistance would lead to an escalation, a distraction the base could not afford. Compliance was the most logical path. The jacket was a tool, but a replaceable one. The data it carried was already uploaded. Its destruction was an illogical act, but fighting it would be equally illogical. Slowly, deliberately, she stood. She did not protest. She did not argue. She simply unzipped the old field jacket. She took a moment to pull her data pad and a few sensor tags from its pockets, placing them carefully on her console. Then she shrugged the jacket off her shoulders. The fabric, worn soft over years of use, slid off. She folded it once, neatly, and held it out to the hesitant sergeant. Her eyes were blank, her face a mask of emotionless neutrality. She said nothing. The silence was her only response, and it was more damning than any curse. The sergeant took the jacket from her as if it were a bomb. He avoided her eyes, mumbling a "ma'am," before turning and quickly exiting the command center. Vance watched the entire exchange with a smug, triumphant smile. He had won. He had publicly humbled the quiet woman who defied his authority simply by existing. He had restored order. "There," he declared to the room at large. "That's better. Now back to work. I want a solution for that ECM. Now." He turned and marched back to the holotable, his sense of power restored. He did not notice the look that passed between Sergeant Eva Rostova, the lead comms tech, and Aris. Rostova had watched the entire scene with a growing sense of disgust. She, more than anyone, had seen the value in Aris's quiet work. She had seen the geologist spend hours calibrating sensors, cross-referencing atmospheric data with seismic readings, building a picture of the environment that was far more detailed than anything their tactical systems could provide. Rostova respected competence, and she had just witnessed competence being punished by ego. Her gaze met Aris's for a moment, a silent message of solidarity. Aris gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, an acknowledgement that the gesture was seen and understood. Then she turned back to her console. She was now in just her gray fatigues, her lean, wiry frame more apparent. She seemed smaller without the bulky jacket, more vulnerable. It was a deceptive appearance. The jacket had been camouflage, a shell of civilian normalcy. Now, it was gone. She pulled up a new diagnostic screen, her fingers flying across the virtual keys. The structured tremors were getting stronger. The rhythm was resolving into a clear pattern, a carrier wave of low-frequency vibrations. It wasn't natural. It was engineered. The enemy wasn't just planning to attack Acheron. They were using the mountain itself as part of their assault. And Vance, in his fit of pique, had just blinded one of her primary passive sensor arrays. The microsensors woven into the fabric of her jacket were now on their way to an incinerator. It was an inconvenience, but not a fatal one. She had other, deeper sensors, and she had the mountain. The first explosion was not a sound, but a feeling. It was a deep, gut-punching thud that traveled through the rock, up through the foundations of the base, and into the soles of their feet. The deck plates shuddered violently. A fine shower of dust drifted down from the ceiling vents. On the hollow table, a dozen red icons blossomed simultaneously around the base's perimeter. Proximity alerts. "Contact!" the tactical officer yelled, his voice cracking with adrenaline. "Multiple contacts, all vectors. They're inside the outer perimeter." "How?" Vance roared, grabbing the edge of the hollow table. "The seismic sensors should have picked them up miles away." "They didn't, sir," the officer stammered. "There was nothing, just background noise, and then this." Eris knew why. The enemy hadn't marched. They had burrowed, their movements masked by the engineered tremors she had been tracking. They had used the planet's own groans to hide their approach. It was a brilliant, terrifying strategy. A second series of explosions rocked the base, closer this time. These were concussive, audible blasts. Alarms began to blare, a cacophony of shrieking sirens and automated warnings. "Report damage," Vance commanded. "Turret emplacements 7 and 9 are offline. We've lost the main comms tower." The lights flickered, then died, plunging the command center into absolute darkness for 3 terrifying seconds. Then the emergency power kicked in, casting the room in the hellish, pulsating red of emergency lighting. On the hollow table, half the defensive icons had turned from green to red. "They're targeting our defense grid first," Rostova said, her voice tight but controlled. "It's a coordinated decapitation strike. But the incoming fire, it's not random artillery. It's too precise." "They can't see us! We can't see them!" Vance bellowed, his face slick with sweat in the red light. "Return fire! Saturation bombardment on all suspected enemy coordinates." "Sir, we have no coordinates," the tactical officer shot back, his professionalism cracking under the strain. "Our targeting sensors are blind. The ECM, the explosions, something else is happening. Our network is collapsing." On Rostova's console, data packets were bleeding away into nothing. The base's secure network, a marvel of redundant systems and hardened protocols, was dissolving. It wasn't a brute force hack. It was something more insidious. It was like a digital disease, corrupting data at the source, turning their own network against them. Every system that relied on it, targeting, internal comms, life support monitoring, was beginning to fail. Vance's face was a mask of disbelief. His entire worldview was built on the foundation of superior technology and established procedure. He was giving the right orders, following the correct protocols for a base under siege. But the protocols were useless. The book had no chapter for this. His tools were broken. His methods were failing. "Get me a hard line to the artillery batteries," he yelled, resorting to the most basic, primitive form of command. "We'll shell the entire valley if we have to." "Sir, the hard lines are failing too," Rostova reported, her voice grim. "The corruption isn't just wireless. It's in the core infrastructure. It's everywhere." A tremendous groaning sound echoed through the rock, a sound of immense tearing. A hairline crack appeared on the reinforced wall of the command center, racing from floor to ceiling like a black lightning bolt. More dust rained down. The very mountain was coming apart around them. Panic began to set in. The carefully constructed order of the command center was breaking down into a collection of frightened soldiers watching their fortress crumble. Vance stood frozen, his face slack with the shock of total system failure. His authority, derived from a system that no longer existed, had evaporated. He was just a man in a dark room, shouting useless orders into a dead network. It was in this moment of collective paralysis, in the heart of the chaos and the red pulsing light, that Eris Thorne stood up. She moved with a calm, deliberate grace that was utterly alien to the frantic energy in the room. She had stripped off her outer fatigue shirt, revealing the garment beneath. It was not military issue. It was a form-fitting, matte black suit of some non-reflective, fibrous material. There were no insignias, no markings of any kind. It looked less like clothing and more like a second skin, woven with micro-conduits that were now faintly glowing with a soft, internal light. The transformation was absolute. The unassuming geologist was gone. In her place was something else entirely, something hard and lethal and utterly focused. She walked past the stunned Major Vance without a glance. She did not seize command. She simply assumed it. Her presence, her focus, her utter lack of fear created a new center of gravity in the room. Authority, real authority, born of pure competence, began to flow toward her. She stopped not at her own secondary console, but at the master engineering terminal, a station that controlled the base's core power and data distribution. Vance finally broke from his stupor. "What do you think you're doing? Get away from that console. That's an order, Doctor." Eris ignored him. Her hands moved over the interface, her fingers a blur. She wasn't trying to repair the corrupted network. She was bypassing it, severing it, killing it completely. A cascade of system failure warnings screamed across the main screen. "You're destroying us!" Vance shrieked, taking a step toward her. "No," Eris said. Her voice was quiet, yet it cut through the din of the alarms. It was the first word she had spoken since the attack began. It was not a plea or an explanation. It was a statement of fact. She turned her head slightly, her gaze falling on Sergeant Rostova. "Sergeant, I need you to divert all primary geothermal power to the Deep Earth Acoustic Sensor Array. Bypass the central regulators. Give me everything you have." It was a critical moment. An order from a civilian against a direct command from the base commander. Rostova looked from Vance's contorted, furious face to Aris's calm, impossibly confident one. She saw the failure of one and the promise of the other. She made her choice. "Yes, ma'am," Rostova said, her voice firm. Her fingers flew across her own board, executing the complex power shunt. The remaining lights in the base dimmed for a second as the massive energy of the geothermal generator was redirected deep into the earth. "Rostova, I'll have you court-martialed," Vance howled, but his threats were empty. He had lost control. The functional hierarchy of the room had already realigned itself around the quiet woman in black. Aris turned her full attention back to the engineering console. "The enemy network isn't airborne," she said, her voice calm and didactic, as if explaining a simple principle to a student. "It's lithospheric. They're using the crystalline structure of the granite as a transmission medium. Our network was built on copper and fiber, designed to resist electromagnetic interference. It never stood a chance against a foe that communicates through solid rock." She brought up a new display on the main screen. It was a 3D model of the mountain, but unlike her previous geological maps, this one was alive. Pulses of light, representing data packets, were flowing through the rock strata beneath them. The enemy's network was visible, a ghostly parasitic nervous system wrapped around the mountain. They used resonant frequencies to tunnel, masking their approach. They're using the same principles to coordinate their attack and cripple our systems. They have turned this mountain into a weapon." Eris paused, her fingers hovering over the console. "But any medium can be hijacked." Her hands descended. She wasn't building a new network. She was colonizing the enemies. Her repurposed seismic sensors, now supercharged by the full output of the geothermal plant, became her injection point. She didn't use brute force. She used finesse. She began broadcasting a single, pure, resonant frequency into the rock, a frequency precisely calibrated to the molecular structure of the quartz-rich granite. It was the geological equivalent of a perfect sine wave. It was elegant, simple, and utterly devastating. On the screen, the enemy's chaotic data pulses began to falter. Her pure signal was introducing harmonic interference. It was noise. She was flooding their network not with data, but with a perfect, overwhelming hum. She was deafening them. The enemy artillery, which had been pounding the base with terrifying precision, suddenly became erratic. Shells began to go wide, impacting harmlessly against the mountainside. Their targeting data, transmitted through the rock, was now hopelessly corrupted. "You've blinded them," Rostova breathed, her eyes wide with awe. "Partially," Eris corrected, her tone clinical. "Now, we find them." She couldn't use their network to transmit her own complex data. It was too saturated with her interference signal, but she could still listen. She reconfigured her sensors, turning them from transmitters back into receivers. The enemy, confused and cut off, began to use more powerful, cruder transmission bursts to try and cut through her noise. Each burst was a flare in the darkness. "They're shouting," Eris murmured, "and I can hear them." She isolated the source of 3 distinct high-energy transmission points. Triangulating them was trivial. The data appeared on her screen, 3 precise coordinates updated in real time. But her own targeting systems were still offline. She had no way to feed the data to the base's weapons. She looked at the remaining automated defense turrets, their icons glowing red for offline on the tactical map. They were offline because their connection to the central network was severed. But they were still powered. Their local processors were still functional. They were just waiting for instructions they could no longer receive. Eris's eyes scanned her console, her mind racing through 1,000 possibilities. The hard lines were corrupted. The wireless was jammed. But there was another path. "Rostova," she said, her voice sharp, "give me access to the control interface for the perimeter lighting system." Rostova, no longer questioning anything, complied instantly. A new window opened on Eris's screen. It was a simple schematic of the high-intensity floodlights that illuminated the base's exterior. Eris began to type, her code fluid and impossibly fast. She wasn't turning on the lights, she was repurposing them. She wrote a simple, brutal protocol that converted targeting coordinates into a series of high-frequency light pulses, turning each floodlight into a primitive optical data transmitter. It was a crude, slow, line-of-sight method, but the defense turret's optical sensors would be able to read it. She uploaded the targeting data. Outside, in the dust-choked chaos, the perimeter floodlights began to flicker, not randomly, but in a precise, impossibly rapid digital rhythm. It was a message, written in light against the dark rock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with the heavy chunk of magnetic locks disengaging, 2 of the remaining automated turrets swiveled. They moved without guidance from the command center, their movements eerily independent. They aimed at a dark, empty patch of mountainside, far from any visible enemy. "There's nothing there," Vance whispered, his voice a ghost. The turrets fired. Twin streams of white-hot plasma screamed into the darkness, converging on a single point. For a second, they seemed to be striking nothing but rock. Then the rock itself exploded. A massive secondary detonation blew a new cave into the mountainside, revealing the twisted metal of a hidden enemy artillery piece and the incinerated remains of its crew. They had been burrowed into the cliff face, perfectly concealed. Aris fed the second coordinate. The lights flickered their deadly message. The turrets retargeted and fired again. Another hidden emplacement vanished in a ball of fire. Then the third. The external assault stopped, not tapered off, but ceased completely. The silence that descended was more profound, more shocking than the noise it replaced. It was the silence of a checkmate, a perfect unconventional victory achieved not with brute force, but with geology, physics, and a breathtaking intellectual leap. In the command center, no one moved. They stared at the main screen, where the tactical map showed 3 confirmed enemy kills and no new contacts. They looked at the woman in the black suit, standing calmly at the engineering console. She had taken a system in total collapse, in an environment designed to kill it, and fashioned it into a weapon of impossible precision. The only sound was the faint, steady hum of the geothermal generator and the groaning of the mountain as it began to settle. The crack in the wall had not widened. Aris's interference wave had not only disrupted the enemy's network, it had also dampened the harmful resonant frequencies that were tearing the base apart. She had pacified the mountain. Then a new icon blinked on the screen. It was a communications request, but it wasn't coming through the standard military channels. It was a secure, encrypted handshake protocol being broadcast through the very lithospheric network Aris had just built. It was a message meant only for her. She accepted the connection. The main screen, which had been showing the tactical map, flickered and resolved into a face. It was a man in his late 60s, with a face carved from granite and eyes that held the cold, clear light of deep space. He wore the uniform of a full general, but the insignia was from a branch of the service so classified that most of the people in the room didn't recognize it. General Madsen, a name spoken only in whispers, the head of the Directorate of Special Operations. A ghost. Madsen's eyes scanned the command center, taking in the damage, the shocked faces of the crew, the broken figure of Major Vance. His gaze finally settled on Aris. There was no surprise in his expression, only a quiet, weary confirmation. "Spectre," he said, his voice a calm, resonant bass. The name hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. "Report." "Threat neutralized, General," Aris replied, her voice as level as his. "Network compromised and purged. Base integrity is stable. We sustained moderate structural damage and a 34% loss to our automated defense grid." "And the asset?" Madsen asked, his eyes flinty. "The passive sensor array was compromised," Aris said, a flicker of something almost like annoyance in her tone. "It was incinerated." Madsen's gaze shifted, locking onto Major Vance. The full crushing weight of his authority descended on the man. "Major Kalen Vance," the general said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "I have a single question for you. Did you, or did you not, order the personal effects of an attached civilian specialist to be destroyed?" Vance's face, already pale, turned the color of ash. He tried to speak, but only a dry clicking sound came from his throat. He looked at Aris, at the woman he had dismissed as a dirt-stained academic, and saw her for the first time. The black suit, the impossible competence, the name the general had used. Spectre. Spectre was not a person. It was a legend. A ghost story the line troops told each other on long watches. A hyper-lethal black ops asset who didn't exist on any official roster. A weapon system in human form. A specialist in environmental warfare. The art of turning a battlefield's own geology, meteorology, and biology against the enemy. Vance had not just humiliated a scientist. He had assaulted a living legend, a figure with more real power in her little finger than he had in his entire career. He had ordered a critical piece of her unique, irreplaceable equipment to be melted down into slag out of pure, petty spite. I did not know, Vance finally stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. It is not your job to know, Madsen replied, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. It is your job to listen to the experts your command provides you. Dr. Thorne was assigned to Acheron because our intelligence indicated the enemy was using unconventional tactics that we could not decipher. Her sole purpose was to observe, analyze, and predict. Her jacket, Major, was not a piece of clothing. It was a multi-spectrum environmental data collection suite. A piece of technology so advanced and so sensitive that its loss will set my program back 6 months. You did not enforce a dress code. You willfully blinded this facility's single most important defensive asset in a fit of arrogant pique, moments before an assault you were warned was coming. Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling Vance's career, his identity, his very sense of self. He visibly shrank, collapsing into his command chair as if his bones had dissolved. Major Vance, the general continued, his voice now utterly devoid of emotion. You are hereby relieved of command. You will be confined to your quarters under guard. A tribunal will convene to determine the full extent of your catastrophic failure. I suspect your career is the very least of what you are about to lose. Madsen's gaze shifted to Rostova. Sergeant Rostova. Eva straightened, her back ramrod straight. Yes, General. You showed initiative and recognized true authority in a crisis. You have temporary command of Acheron until a replacement for the Major arrives. See to it that Spectre has everything she needs to conduct her post-action assessment. Yes, General, Rostova said, her voice ringing with purpose. Madsen looked back at Ares. Spectre, your transport will be there at 0600. I need you at Station Epsilon by noon tomorrow. We have another problem. Acknowledged, Ares said. The screen went blank. The silence that followed was different. The tension was gone, replaced by a profound, shell-shocked awe. The crew of the command center stared at Ares, their expressions a mixture of fear and reverence. They were seeing a myth made real. The quiet geologist who mapped rocks was a phantom who commanded mountains. Ares showed no sign of triumph or satisfaction. The revelation of her identity meant nothing to her beyond its operational context. She turned back to the engineering console and began methodically running diagnostics, her movements as precise and emotionless as before. The crisis was over. Now, the work of analysis began. 2 security guards arrived and escorted the utterly broken Major Vance from the room. He didn't look at anyone, his eyes fixed on the floor, a man already erased. A new order settled over the command center. It was quieter, more efficient. Rostova moved with a new confidence, issuing clear, concise orders to begin damage control and re-establish primary systems. The crew responded with a professionalism that had been absent under Vance's blustering command. They worked around Eris, giving her a wide berth, speaking in hushed tones as if in the presence of a god. Hours passed. The red emergency lighting was replaced by the steady, cool white of the main power grid. The base slowly came back to life, system by system. Through it all, Eris never stopped working. She compiled sensor logs, analyzed the enemy's corrupted data fragments, and built a complete profile of their lithospheric warfare capabilities. She worked with a singular, relentless focus, a force of nature in her own right. Sometime before dawn, Rostova approached her. She didn't speak. She simply placed a steaming thermal mug on the console beside Eris's keyboard. It was black coffee, no sugar, no cream. A simple gesture. It was not praise or thanks. It was a sign of respect, an acknowledgement of competence, a treaty between two professionals. Eris paused her work for a fraction of a second. She glanced at the mug, then at Rostova. She gave that same, barely perceptible nod she had given hours before. It was enough. Rostova nodded back and returned to her post. At precisely 0600, a low hum vibrated through the base. A sleek, black, unmarked VTOL craft, a machine that looked like it was carved from a piece of the night sky, settled onto the landing pad. Its engines made almost no sound. Eris stood. Her work was done. The complete analysis was already encrypted and being burst transmitted to Madsen's directorate. She walked toward the command center exit. As she passed the main entryway, she saw a new field jacket, identical to her old one, hanging on a hook. A silent offering from the base's quartermaster. She took it and put it on. The camouflage was back in place. She walked out into the cold, thin air of the high mountains. The sun was just beginning to touch the highest peaks, painting them in hues of orange and rose. The air was clean, the silence once again the profound, ancient silence of the rock. She did not look back at FOB Acheron. She walked up the ramp into the waiting transport, a solitary figure merging with the shadows inside. The ramp closed, and the craft lifted away, vanishing into the morning sky as silently as it had arrived. Left behind was a story that would quickly become a legend, passed in hushed tones through the ranks. They would speak of the day the mountain screamed, of the commander who fell, and of the quiet geologist who wore a stained jacket. They would speak of Spectre, the ghost who walked through their ranks unnoticed, a woman whose true authority was not written on a uniform, but in the very bedrock of the world. She left behind a lesson etched into the memory of every soul at Acheron. That true power is not loud, it does not posture, and it does not demand respect. It is quiet, it is competent, and when the time comes, it simply is. The quiet professional was gone, leaving only the echo of her flawless, silent work, and the humbling knowledge that the most dangerous forces are the ones you never see coming.